The sky above Chicago did not simply crack open, it broke apart like glass, and in that same moment Invincible was in the middle of a brutal fight near the Willis Tower against one of the more savage variants. But then a burst of white energy ripped through the air like a broken mirror, and two figures came falling out of the void, shouting as they dropped fast and smashed into the street below, and Mark stopped in midair at once, hovering over the road because he knew he had not caused that. So he looked down expecting another enemy, yet what he saw was something far stranger. A tall man with white hair and a blindfold standing calmly inside a crater of shattered concrete, as if none of this bothered him at all. And beside him, a pink-haired teenager in a school uniform slowly pushed himself off the ground and brushed the dust from his jacket. Then the boy groaned and complained that the landing had hurt, asking Gojo-sensei whether they really had to crash that hard. And the white-haired man only tilted his head with a relaxed grin and told Yuji not to blame him because the exit had been rough, though at least they were still alive. And Mark slowly came down with his guard up and demanded to know who they were, wondering if they were some kind of new variant too. So the white-haired man turned toward him, and even through the blindfold, Mark felt the pressure of someone terrifying looking right through him. Then the stranger joked that if people here called fashion disasters variants, that explained a lot. And as he said it, he lifted the bottom of his blindfold just enough to reveal eyes so bright and deep they looked endless, glowing blue like an impossible sea of light. Then he introduced himself as Gojo Satoru, and said the boy with him was his student Yuji Itadori, adding that they were just a little lost and wanted to know if this was Shibuya, which made Mark stare for a second before answering that this was not Shibuya at all. This was Chicago, Earth, his Earth. And Yuji looked around at the burning buildings, wrecked cars, and the distant screams of terrified people, and awkwardly pointed out that they definitely were not in Japan anymore, then nervously asked whether that flying guy was actually real. But before Mark could even reply, a massive crash thundered from behind them as a building on the next block gave way, and from the smoke and falling dust came another Mark variant. Only this one was huge, with thick muscles stretching under gray skin and a red mask over his face. And the second he spotted Mark, he roared in rage and screamed that he had finally found him, then shot forward like a missile straight at Mark's chest, and Mark tightened his body, ready for the hit. But the attack never reached him because suddenly, Gojo's calm voice cut through the chaos as he activated domain expansion, unlimited void, and in that instant the whole world seemed to shift as the gray variant froze in midair, trapped inside a black and white nightmare space where endless information flooded his brain faster than he could bear, and his eyes rolled back while his body went limp from pure overload. Then with a lazy snap of his fingers, Gojo ended the technique, and the variant dropped like a dead weight, already unconscious before he even hit the ground, and silence swallowed the street for a moment, while Mark stared at him in total disbelief because he had fought monsters, aliens, and Viltrumites before, but never anything like this. No punch, no impact, no visible force, just complete shutdown. So he landed softly and asked what Gojo had just done to him, and Gojo casually said he had overloaded the man's brain and that he would probably wake up later with a terrible headache, maybe even memory loss, though it was hard to tell. Then he patted Yuji on the shoulder and said this was exactly why technique mattered, and Yuji kept staring wide-eyed at the unconscious variant, amazed that his teacher had done all that in just a few seconds without even touching him. But Mark had no time to stay shocked because another explosion shook the city, and he stepped closer, more urgent now, telling them he did not know how they got there, but the city was under attack and there were more of those things, more versions of him from other dimensions, and they were trying to kill everyone. So Gojo looked Mark up and down with interest and said variants of him. Huh? Then admitted Mark clearly had serious physical power, though his energy flow felt strange because it was not cursed energy, which only made Mark snap that there was no time for lessons, and if they could fight, he needed their help right now. Then Gojo slid both hands into his pockets with that same easy smile and replied that helping people was kind of their job, asking Yuji if he was ready. And Yuji tightened his fists with a determined face and said yes, they should do this. While far away across the city, Cecil Stedman watched the live satellite feeds with growing horror because the energy signatures from the two newcomers made no sense at all. The scanners could not even classify them. One of them registered like an empty void of pure black nothingness, while the other gave off a wild, unstable darkness that reminded Cecil of magical objects he had tried to bury and forget long ago. So he barked into his comms and asked Donald what exactly they were looking at, and Donald admitted he had no answer, only that those two had just taken down a dangerous variant without even moving properly, and whatever they were, they definitely were not Viltrumite. So Cecil narrowed his eyes and ordered the Guardians to get ready because if those two turned out to be enemies, then everyone might be needed. And back on the streets, the three fighters moved quickly through through the ruined city until they found several variants trapping a group of civilians inside a parking structure, and this time there were 3 of them, all twisted versions of Mark, one with robotic arms, one covered in scars, and one who looked half dead from sleepless rage, his eyes red and unstable, and the scarred one mocked the people hiding behind the cars, telling them to come out while smashing a pillar hard enough to crack the concrete and send dust raining over the terrified families. But then a sharp voice shouted, "Hey!" and all 3 variants turned to see Mark floating over the entrance with his cape moving in the wind. So the robotic one laughed and said the main course had arrived and had even brought friends. Then all 3 launched at him together, and Mark intercepted the first one in midair as the 2 of them traded heavy punches. But the other 2 slipped past and rushed straight toward Yuji and Gojo, and the wild-eyed variant dived at Yuji with his fist pulled back for a deadly strike, yet Yuji stepped forward without fear and used Divergent Fist, slamming his glowing punch into the man's jaw before the variant could react. And a split second later, the delayed burst of cursed energy hit like a second blow and sent the variant crashing through the wall of the structure. Then Yuji shook his hand and winced, complaining that these guys felt hard as rock, and the robotic variant hesitated in disbelief at the strength of this teenager, asking what he even was. So Yuji took his stance and said he was a Jujutsu sorcerer and he was not going to let him hurt anyone else, while at the same time the scarred variant flew straight at Gojo with a furious scream and threw a punch strong enough to level a building. But the attack stopped an inch away from Gojo's face as if it had hit an invisible wall, and Gojo did not even blink, only softly saying that was rude because the man had not even said hello. Then he raised one finger and the air around it hummed with pressure before he released Cursed Technique Reversal. Red, and a violent red burst exploded outward, blasting the variant backward at horrifying speed until he smashed through 3 buildings and finally stopped only when his body slammed into the steel frame of a construction crane and bent it in half. Then, Mark finished pinning down the first variant with a piece of rebar and turned to look around, and what he saw left him speechless because Yuji was actually holding his ground against a Viltrumite-level enemy, trading blows so hard the pavement cracked beneath them, while the scarred one lay half buried under rubble, still twitching, and through all of it, Gojo stood in the center of the destruction looking completely relaxed, hands still in his pockets like none of this was worth effort. So Mark landed beside him, breathing hard, and asked again who they really were, and Gojo simply turned that blindfolded face toward him and reminded him that he had already said it. They were the strongest, or at least he was, because Yuji was still learning. Yet before anyone could catch a breath, the battle shifted again as the sky above the city slowly darkened, and high overhead Angstrom Levy floated inside a swirling portal, watching everything with cold fury because too many of his variants had already fallen and his plan was slipping away. So at last he muttered that enough was enough, then raised both hands and opened dozens of portals at once, and from each one new horrors emerged. Not just more Mark variants now, but twisted monsters dragged from darker worlds where evolution had turned cruel, creatures with claws, scales, and rows of snapping teeth, and they poured into the city like a plague, making even Gojo's smile fade a little as he looked up and said, "That was annoying," and Mark's voice tightened as he admitted they could not fight all of them because there were simply too many. Then Angstrom's voice boomed across the city through the portals as he ordered Mark Grayson to surrender, or else he would unleash reanimate armies across every major city on Earth, while Yuji punched one of the monsters in the face and turned back to his teacher, shouting for Gojo-sensei and asking what they should do now. And that was when Gojo slowly reached up and pulled his blindfold down fully, revealing those terrifying blue eyes shining with overwhelming force. Then he said they were done holding back, and with that, he rose into the air until he was level with Angstrom Levy himself, while the pressure around him grew so heavy that the light seemed to bend. Then he casually called Angstrom Forehead Guy, and Angstrom glared at him and said that he was the anomaly, the one who did not belong in this world. But Gojo answered that Angstrom did not belong here either, and that messing with dimensions you did not understand was a bad idea, especially when it disturbed the peace, and he could not allow that. So Angstrom sneered and declared that Gojo could never stop him because he had infinite worlds under his control. But Gojo's expression changed then, and the smile on his face was no longer playful. It was cold and final, and he calmly told Angstrom that he seemed confused, so he would show him the difference between them, then raised his hand and crossed his fingers before unleashing hollow purple, and in front of him formed a sphere of impossible color, neither red nor blue, but a twisting mass of pure erasure that made the air scream as even space itself began to vanish around it. And for the first time, Angstrom's face broke with real fear as he tried to open a portal and flee. But he was too slow, and Gojo quietly told him goodbye before flicking his hand forward, and the purple blasted ahead like the end of everything, erasing the monsters, shredding the portals, and tearing straight through the air where Angstrom hovered. And though Angstrom managed to open a portal at the very last second, the the edge of the attack still sliced into him, and he let out a horrible scream as half his arm vanished into nothing, and he tumbled through the portal before it snapped shut behind him. Then below, all the monsters who had depended on him froze in confusion, and many of them had already been erased from existence by the blast. So Gojo lowered his hand and slowly exhaled before pulling his blindfold back down and casually remarking that things had gotten messy. And back on the ground, Mark stood there in stunned silence because the danger was not just defeated, it was wiped away completely, while Yuji jogged over with monster blood on his face and asked his teacher whether he had gotten the guy. And Gojo answered that he had only scared him off, but men like that always came back. Still, they had bought it some time, and Mark looked at the two strangers in front of him and felt something he almost never felt in battle. Real relief, because he had fought beside the Guardians, beside his father, beside Alan, but these two were different. They were not just strong, they were unfair. So he quietly thanked them and admitted he did not think they could have stopped all that without them. And Gojo only patted his shoulder and told him not to worry because they were all heroes here, right? Then Yuji looked around the ruined street and awkwardly asked how they were supposed to get home now. So Gojo glanced at the sky and then at Mark and said that was actually a good question, wondering whether Mark's boss had some way to send them back, or at least somewhere they could stay, because fighting multi-dimensional enemies had made him hungry. And despite everything, Mark finally let out a tired laugh as the weight on his shoulders eased, saying he thought they could work something out, but at the same time, hidden in the rubble of the parking structure, a hand suddenly burst from the concrete, and the scarred variant slowly dragged himself free, his body crushed and broken, but already healing. Because he had survived Red, he had survived the collapse, and now he had a new goal. So he watched the three of them walking away together, even laughing, completely unaware of the danger still behind them. Then he reached into his belt and pulled out a small beacon device, pressed it, and whispered that it was him, that he had found them, and more importantly, he had found the weak point of the blindfolded one. Then the device crackled, and a voice on the other side answered that it was good and ordered him to begin Phase 2 because they were coming. And the scarred variant smiled through blood-stained teeth as the truth settled in. This crossover had only just begun.